Today, you boys will be involved in such activities as war games, ambush techniques, and blowing stuff up.
I don't think I can do this.
Of course you can.
I was your age, I had an imaginary friend. Got me in so much trouble.
There are films that approach history with a heavy, solemn tone. And then there are those rare stories that take something deeply tragic and filter it through humor, innocence, and imagination to reveal truths that might otherwise feel too overwhelming to confront. This story lives in that rare space where satire and sincerity exist side by side, creating an emotional experience that feels both disarming and quietly devastating. Set during one of the darkest periods in human history, it chooses not to focus on battlefields or grand political movements, but instead narrows its lens to a child's perspective, where confusion, loyalty, fear, and love all collide in unexpected ways. At the center of the narrative is a young boy whose worldview has been carefully shaped by propaganda, authority, and a desperate need to belong. He idolizes a regime he barely understands, clinging to its ideology not out of cruelty, but out of a childlike longing for identity and purpose. In his mind, the world is divided into simple categories of right and wrong, friend and enemy, strength and weakness. What makes his journey so compelling is how fragile that worldview really is, and how quickly it begins to fracture when confronted with reality. One of the most striking elements of the story is how it uses imagination as both a shield and a mirror. The boy's inner thoughts manifest in ways that blur the line between fantasy and reality, creating moments that are absurd, humorous, and deeply revealing at the same time. These imaginative sequences aren't just comedic devices, they serve as windows into his psyche, exposing the fears, insecurities, and contradictions that he cannot yet articulate. Through this lens, the film explores how children process complex and often terrifying ideas, turning them into something they can grasp, even if that understanding is flawed. At home, his life appears somewhat ordinary, though there's an undercurrent of tension that slowly becomes more noticeable. His relationship with his mother is particularly important, as she represents a different kind of strength, one that isn't rooted in power or dominance, but in compassion and quiet defiance. She carries herself with warmth and resilience, offering her son love and guidance even as the world around them grows increasingly unstable. There is a sense that she understands far more than she reveals, carefully navigating a reality that requires both courage and secrecy. The turning point in the story arrives not with a dramatic explosion or a battlefield confrontation, but with a discovery that is both intimate and life-altering. Hidden within the walls of his own home is a secret that challenges everything he's been taught to believe. The presence of a young girl, someone he's been conditioned to see as the enemy, forces him into a situation where ideology and humanity collide in the most personal way possible. Suddenly, the abstract ideas he's absorbed are no longer distant concepts. They have a face, a voice, and a story. Their interactions begin with tension, suspicion, and a kind of awkward hostility. But there is also curiosity on both sides. The boy, who's been raised to fear and distrust, finds himself asking questions that reveal both his ignorance and his innocence. The girl, in turn, responds with a mixture of patience, sarcasm, and quiet strength. She has endured more than he can comprehend, yet she retains a sense of dignity that stands in contrast to the caricatures he's been taught. As their relationship evolves, the tone of the story shifts in subtle but powerful ways. The humor remains, often emerging from the absurdity of the boy's misconceptions, but it is increasingly layered with emotion. Moments that might initially seem lighthearted begin to carry deeper weight as the audience becomes aware of the stakes that the boy himself only gradually begins to understand. This balance between comedy and tragedy is one of the film's greatest strengths, allowing it to explore difficult themes without becoming overwhelming. The world outside the home continues to press in, reinforcing the ideology that the boy is struggling to reconcile with his growing awareness. Authority figures and societal expectations serve as constant reminders of the narrative he's been taught, creating a sense of conflict that feels both internal and external. The boy is caught between two realities, one that demands loyalty and conformity, and another that is slowly revealing itself through personal connection and empathy. What makes this journey so impactful is that it doesn't rely on sudden transformation or dramatic epiphanies. Instead, it unfolds through small moments, quiet realizations, and subtle shifts in perspective. The boy's understanding changes piece by piece, often in ways that he doesn't fully recognize at the time. This gradual evolution feels authentic, reflecting the way real growth often occurs, not as a single turning point, but as a series of experiences that reshape how we see the world. The emotional core of the story is deeply tied to the idea of love in its many forms. There's the unconditional love of a parent, the tentative and complicated bond between two individuals brought together by circumstance, and the broader concept of compassion that transcends ideology. These different expressions of love serve as a counterbalance to the hatred and fear that define the larger world, suggesting that even in the darkest times, there are forces that resist and endure. There are moments in the narrative that hit with unexpected intensity, catching the viewer off guard precisely because of the film's often playful tone. These scenes don't rely on spectacle or excess. Instead, they are grounded in simplicity and emotional truth. A single image, a brief interaction, or a quiet realization can carry immense weight, leaving a lasting impression that lingers long after the moment has passed. It is in these instances that the film reveals its deeper purpose, moving beyond satire to confront the human costs of the ideology it critiques. The use of humor throughout the story is particularly noteworthy, as it walks a delicate line between irreverence and respect. The comedic elements are not used to diminish the seriousness of the subject matter, but rather to highlight its absurdity and contradictions. By presenting certain ideas in an exaggerated or ironic light, the film invites the audience to question them, exposing the flaws and dangers that might otherwise be overlooked. This approach allows the story to engage with its themes in a way that feels both accessible and thought-provoking. At the same time, the film never loses sight of its characters, ensuring that the emotional journey remains at the forefront. The boy's transformation is the anchor that holds everything together, providing a lens through which the audience can experience the story's broader themes. His innocence, vulnerability, and gradual awakening create a sense of investment that makes every moment feel significant. By the end of the narrative, he is no longer the same person he was at the beginning, and that change feels earned rather than imposed. The girl's presence is equally important, serving as both a catalyst for the boy's growth and a fully realized character in her own right. She is not defined solely by her circumstances, but by her resilience, intelligence, and humanity. Through her interactions with the boy, she challenges not only his beliefs, but also the audience's expectations, reminding us that identity is far more complex than the labels imposed by society. The relationship between these two characters becomes a microcosm of the larger conflict, illustrating how personal connection can break down barriers that seem insurmountable from a distance. Their conversations, disagreements, and moments of understanding reveal the power of empathy to transform perception. What begins as a forced coexistence gradually evolves into something more meaningful, highlighting the possibility of change even in the most unlikely circumstances. As the story progresses, the tension between the internal and external worlds becomes more pronounced. The boy's evolving perspective puts him at odds with the environment he once embraced, creating a sense of isolation and uncertainty. This conflict is not portrayed as a simple choice between right and wrong, but as a complex process of unlearning and reevaluating deeply ingrained beliefs. The film acknowledges how difficult this process can be, especially for someone who has been shaped by a system that discourages questioning. The narrative also touches on the idea of courage, not as a grand or heroic act, but as something quieter and more personal. It is found in the willingness to question, to empathize, and to act with compassion even when it is risky or inconvenient. This form of courage is embodied by multiple characters in different ways, reinforcing the notion that resistance can take many forms and that even small acts of kindness can have profound impact. Visually and tonally, the film maintains a unique balance that sets it apart from more conventional stories set in the same historical context. The aesthetic choices often reflect the child's perspective, blending vibrant imagery with moments of stark realism. This contrast enhances the emotional resonance of the story, making the shifts in tone feel more impactful. The world is not presented as purely bleak or purely whimsical, but as a complex mixture of both, mirroring the boy's evolving understanding. By the time the story reaches its conclusion, there is a sense of both loss and hope. The journey has not been easy, and the consequences of the larger conflict are impossible to ignore. Yet, there is also a feeling that something meaningful has been gained, a deeper understanding of humanity, a rejection of blind hatred, and a recognition of the value of empathy. The ending does not offer simple answers or tidy resolutions, but it provides a sense of closure that feels honest and earned. Ultimately, this is a story about perspective, how it's shaped, how it can be challenged, and how it can change. It explores the impact of ideology on the individual, particularly on those who are too young to fully comprehend its implications. At the same time, it celebrates the resilience of the human spirit, suggesting that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, there is always the possibility of growth and connection. What lingers most after the story ends is not just its humor or its emotional moments, but the questions it raises. What makes us believe what we believe? What does it take to challenge those beliefs? And perhaps most importantly, what role does empathy play in shaping a more compassionate world? These questions resonate beyond the confines of the narrative, inviting the audience to reflect on their own perspectives and the forces that influence them. In a cinematic landscape often defined by spectacle and scale, this story stands out for its intimacy and its willingness to engage with difficult themes in a nuanced and unconventional way. It reminds us that even the smallest stories can carry immense weight, and that sometimes the most powerful journeys are the ones that take place within.